All right, we'll get started in just a few more seconds. All right, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Two Unexpected Traits of Effective Leadership with Tim Spiker. I'm Kelsey Wood, Senior Marketing Manager here at RightNow Media at Work. RightNow Media at Work is a powerful tool for Christian business leaders to care for employees, cultivate a healthy team, and inspire leaders. It's a voluntary faith-based library of more than 25,000 streaming videos on topics such as leadership, personal development, and work-life balance, plus personal care topics like marriage, parenting, finance, and mental health from speakers like Henry Cloud, John Acuff, Nona Jones, and more. In the webinar today, you'll hear from Matt Wood, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at RightNow Media. Matt supports our organization's mission to help people live out their faith in their neighborhoods, offices, schools, and homes around the world. The nearly 200 people at RightNow Media serve over 20,000 churches, ministries, and Christian business leaders with powerful video content that inspires people to action. And of course, Tim Spiker, leadership advisor and author of The Only Leaders Worth Following, a book that reveals and examines the data-driven truth within effective leadership. Since 2001, Tim has been passionately studying the impact leadership has on lives and on bottom lines. Tim's passion turned into a company, the Aperio, in 2013, an organization focused on helping leaders across the globe become, be, and stay leaders who are actually worth following. Tim's work includes delivering keynote talks, creating unique personal growth methods, and guiding long-term leadership development experiences. Additionally, Tim is the host of the Be Worth Following podcast. A few housekeeping items before we jump in. Tim will discuss two unexpected leadership traits. Then Matt will ask Tim some of the questions we receive from our audience throughout the webinar. So please be sure to send in your questions using the Q&A feature within Zoom. Everyone's microphones are muted throughout the webinar, and you may adjust your screen to see the speakers and slides better, as well as your audio. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded. Everyone who signed up for today's webinar will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours after it ends. If you don't see it in your inbox, make sure to check your spam folder. Without further ado, I'll turn this over to Matt and Tim.
Thank you, Kelsey. Hey, everybody. It's great to be with you today. And it's great to have Tim with us. I'm excited to have Tim share with us about being an effective leader. I think he's got a great story to intro to us to kick things off. But before we do, just thinking about this topic, I think everyone here who is a leader wants to be someone who others want to follow. And I know that sometimes that can be a daunting task. And that goes for me firsthand as well. So I'm looking forward to being challenged by what Tim has to share with us today. And I hope that each one of you in the audience is not only challenged, but also encouraged. Just a reminder before Tim takes over here, as you're listening in to Tim share about being an effective leader, send in your questions through the chat. He's going to spend about 30 minutes here sharing with us, and then I'll come back on and ask all of your questions. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you now and let you talk to us about being effective leaders.
Thanks, Matt. You know, as I was preparing for today, I thought about the opening. I thought about what did I want to share with everyone to get us started. And all of those ideas went out the door this morning. I have this great studio set up in my office. It's well lit. The microphones are great. But as I got lined up to get on with the call today, my internet was down. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to work. And I thought about maybe running it off of my phone. But yesterday, Verizon informed me that I was near the end of my unlimited data. I know that doesn't make any sense when you say unlimited, but you know, they're going to throttle you. And so I can't use that. So I hop in the car this morning and I drive home because I know I've got internet and my kids are at school, so we can do it there. I pull up to my house. I've got a message on my phone that says, "We see that your Wi-Fi is down. Let us help you troubleshoot it." There's construction being done outside my neighborhood. There's no power in the house anywhere. And then on top of that, I get a message on my phone as I'm leaving the house that says, your auto pay did not go through as it normally would for my internet. So here's what I'm going to say about all of this. I believe that this is ordained time for us to be together, because what I want to share with you today is my life's work, the work that God has put me to do. And I firmly believe that we have forces working against us, and they're working against me today. I got so many people praying to get this fixed, and here I am. And I have to say a special shout out to my church, which is where I'm at now, Cross Point Church, the Franklin campus here in Tennessee. They came through at the last minute, and now we're going to get to spend this time together. So I share all that to say, lean in. I believe wholeheartedly that God has something very special for all of us today. And I say that to echo what Matt just said. It is so much easier to talk about great leadership than it is to be a great leader. And if you want to know about that, just ask my coworkers and my wife and kids. They've got all of the examples of the places where I have fallen short from the very research and the words that I use. In fact, I had to at one point. I'd asked my wife, I said, can we please not reference my book whenever we're in a disagreement? Because I was never able to measure up to what the research says. And yet we still move forward. We still look up and to the right. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about these two aspects of leadership that honestly are rarely talked about around how to be an effective leader. And yet the research, we're going to get into a little bit of data today. This is what the research says. And so to start off today, we're going to do a little exercise here together, and you're going to be participating in the chat for this exercise. Now, this is a visualization exercise, and it's going to require you to really dig in. And so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're receiving an email. And in just a moment, I'm going to read that email to you. But I need you to be very specific in who you imagine this email coming from. And here's who it's coming from. It's coming from somebody you really, really do not trust. All right. You might even, at your computer there by your phone, jot the initials of that person down. This is somebody you really, really do not trust. Okay. Now, as I read this email, again, the point is to visualize actually receiving this email. So if you normally get your email on your phone or on a laptop, wherever you normally get your email, I want you to imagine that's where you're getting it. I want you to vividly think about this happening. Here comes the email. I'm going to read it to you now. The subject line is, you have been chosen. Here we go. I have chosen you to take on some new responsibilities. They won't be easy, but I think they are a real fit with your skills. This will be a big help to our team, and I'm confident that this will advance your career. In the end, even though this will be difficult, you're really going to benefit from this, I promise. All right. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being coming out of your skin excited, 1 being I'm going to delete this email right now and not do anything with it at all, I want you to write down the number of where your excitement and engagement are. Again, 10 is I'm coming out of my skin excited. 1 is, yeah, I think I'm going to delete this and not even respond. All right. Now, we're going to do a second visualization exercise. A second visualization exercise. I'm going to read to you another email. Only this time, we're going to do it a little bit differently. I want you to imagine receiving this next email that I'm about to read to you from somebody you really, really do trust. Okay? So you have that person in mind. Maybe you write down their initials. All right. Now I'm going to read the email to you. Again, vividly imagine. The point of this exercise is what you feel, how you engage. So let me read this next email to you. Imagine that it's coming from somebody you really, really trust. Here we go. The subject line of this email is, you have been chosen. Here's the email. I have chosen you to take on some new responsibilities. They won't be easy, but I think they are a real fit with your skills. This will be a big help to our team, and I'm confident that this will advance your career. In the end, Even though this will be difficult, you're really going to benefit from this, I promise. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being coming out of your skin excited, 1 being I'm going to delete this without even responding, I want you to write down what your number is. Did you feel the difference? I know you did. Here's what I want you to put in the chat. I see lots of folks dropping in individual numbers, but I've been taking data with this exercise for 5 years now, and I want to add everybody in this room into that data set. So here's what I'd like you to do. In the chat, I want you to put the first number from the first email, a comma, and then the second number. And just drop that in the chat. And I'm going to put that into our data set. And you can see all the numbers flying in here, and you get a pretty good sense that there's a pretty big delta between round number 1 and round number 2. And that is the point, my friends. Now I'm sure you noticed that there was not a single syllable different between the first email and the second email. And yet, as you see these numbers coming in through the chat, on a percentage basis, there are enormous gaps. I just here a moment ago, I just saw a 2 and then an 8 land in there. Let me just do the math here, because I'm an engine nerd and I like to do the math, so we'll do it quickly. If I go from 2 to 4, that's 100% increase. If I go from 2 to 6, that's 200% increase. If I go from a 2 to an 8, that's a 300% increase in engagement based on one thing alone. As I have collected this data over the years, I want to tell you that on average, engagement goes up between email number 1 and email number 2, 264.9%. I guess we could call it 265. That's just my engineer coming out. But 265% increase in engagement based on one thing and one thing alone, and that is the trustworthiness of the leader. This is where we begin. This is what's going to lead us in to the depths of our conversation today. The question that I think all of us need to be asking at all times as leaders is, what can I do today to become a little more trustworthy than I was yesterday? Now, I'm going to use this whiteboard. My art skills are terrible, but we're still going to do it. There's this thing that leaders are after. It's results. Oh, you can't see that very well because of that glare, but it says results, okay? So what leaders are after are results. And you know what? That applies even when we're just talking, and I shouldn't say just, that applies even when we're talking about our families. There are certain outcomes. Obviously, in a family, it's unlikely to be financial, but we have our businesses. We have our nonprofit organizations. We have a variety of different institutions, including the family, where we're after a result as a leader. And the question is, how do we get there? Now, the number one answer, for those of you that might be familiar with Gallup has done study across the globe over many years, and it has revealed through over 1.5 million data points, over 400 studies combined. So this is a meta study, a study of studies that has found the impact of engagement. So I'm bringing up engagement now. You're like, wait, we were talking about trust a moment ago. Hang with me, okay? The number one driver of results is engagement. That says engagement. I know you can't read it, but that says engagement. We'll have some great graphics for you to share afterwards. But we need engagement, and this isn't rocket science. I mean, it's amazing that we have over 400 studies globally across more than 70 industries and more than 45 countries, 1.8 million participants to be exact, that show the connection between engagement and results. And so the end of that story is not something we can argue with. No matter what measure you want to look at, whether you want to look at profitability, you want to look at safety, you want to look at quality, you want to look at defects, you want to look at any measure in a business that you want to look at, it all goes up positively or down positively. For instance, absenteeism would be down positively. It all moves significantly with engagement. And if you're wondering if there's marketplace advantage available to you, if we're going to stay on the business side for a moment, just know this, that globally, the full engagement percentage is currently estimated to be at about 15%. 15% of the workforce globally is fully engaged. Here in the United States, that number is more around 30%. And so we might feel a little bit better for those of us that are from the States here, might say, hey, we're double the rest of the world, until you do the math and remember that if we're 30% fully engaged, we're 70% not fully engaged. And this really matters because engagement drives results. So the question is there a marketplace possibility, a marketplace advantage for you and every leader on the planet if we raise engagement? The answer is yes, without question. And so that brings us to the question of what drives engagement. And now I'm going to come back to our email that says trust. Think about the exercise that we just did together. Again, we didn't change a single syllable in the entire email. All we changed was the trustworthiness of the person delivering the message. And when we changed that, well, you can look through the chat yourself. So yeah, I shared with you the 264.9%, 265% increase in engagement based on trustworthiness. And so maybe you're ahead of me now and you're seeing, oh wait, the next question is going to be, what drives this? What drives trust? And for that, I want to tell you a little story that's going to get us to these two most critical and very unexpected aspects that drive effective leadership. Earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to work with a consulting firm, and we were bringing people up to the west side of Pikes Peak here in the US, in Colorado, to put them through a group of leadership development exercises over the course of a week. As they arrived with us, we also put them through a number of assessments. We put them through a personality assessment, one that many of you may be familiar with, the Myers-Briggs, MBTI. We also gave them a natural abilities assessment called the Highlands. Now, what do I mean by natural abilities? One example for one of the tests is they would show you a string of numbers. And they would say, okay, here's 15 numbers. Then they would take the string away and say, how many can you remember in order? The ability to regurgitate either 3 numbers or 12 of those numbers is what they would call a natural ability. So there was a variety of different things that the Highlands, that natural ability, measured. And the third assessment that we had was a 360 leadership assessment where leaders got to hear from their peers, from who they were reporting to, and from the subordinates that were reporting to them. So we had all of this data. And our clients would come to us and say, what's the magic mix? What's the magic formula? What personality quality adds in with a natural ability that produces a better leader, or a leader who's better at a certain part of leading? And so my colleague, Vanessa Kiley, she put her fingers to the keyboard and she let the SPSS software do its thing. And I still remember the night that I walked into her office. She said she had the results from the study. And I walked in, and here's what she said. No, your computer's not broken. She said nothing. She said there's no statistical correlation between any aspect of personality, any natural ability, and leadership performance. And I will share with you that I was actually relatively happy with that answer. I mean, I didn't expect it. We thought we were going to find something, but at least now I had an answer when our clients would say, what's the magic mix? I would just say, you know what? There isn't one. I got up to leave Vanessa's office and she said, but I did find something else. And I turned around okay, what did you find? You see, in an act of desperation, Vanessa went to the SPSS software and said, just go find anything. Go find any statistically significant correlation anywhere you can in the entire data set. And here's what that statistical analysis came back with. It said, you don't need to look at personality. There's nothing there. You don't need to look at natural ability. There's nothing there. Just look at the leadership 360, because you have 8 aspects of leadership that you are measuring on this 360, and just 2 of them are driving 77% of the results. I want you to think about that for a second. If you've got easiest way for me to think about this is a pizza. If you take a pizza and you cut it up as you normally would, now I say that, let me just brief side rabbit trail for just a second. I have a family of 4. We've got a 15-year-old down to a 7-year-old. I highly recommend the square cut pizza. So let me just put that out there as an opinion to share. That being said, I don't want you to imagine a square cut pizza. I want you to imagine where you've crossed the pizza like this and you've got 8 equal slices. That's how we would normally think about dividing a pizza. But imagine you cut up a pizza such that 2 slices, just 2 slices, were 77% of the pizza. I can assure you that those would be the 2 slices that my 15-year-old son would go after. And so all of this accidental research, I will say, it really begs the question then, which 2? Which were the 2 aspects of leadership that we were measuring that were driving 77% of the results? So I'm going to put up on the screen right now the list of 8 things and give you a chance to look at it and guess which 2 you think it is. So here's the list. All right, so we see set direction, think strategically, align resources, motivate and inspire, others focused, execute and follow through, inwardly sound, and develop talent. All right, so let's go ahead and take a little more, let's do a little more data exchange here in the room. I want you to drop in the chat which 2 you think it is. Go ahead and drop that in there now. You'll get a chance to see all of these answers coming through. All right, so people are placing their bets. Which were the 2 that were responsible for 77% of a leader's effectiveness? And the answer is inwardly sound and others focused. Inwardly sound and others focused. Now, I want to share with you the most common answer that we see with regard to this activity. And that most common answer is the one in the lower left there, motivate and inspire. Everybody seems to understand that if we're going to get anything done as leaders, our folks need to have energy, whether it's wind in the sails or gas in the tank or whatever other transportation analogy that you want to use. Everybody understands that that needs to be present in order to get things done. But what I think we don't quite understand very well is what provides that energy. And in the end, it's these 2 things. Now, excuse me, I want to come back for just a second to our email exercise, where all we did was change the trustworthiness of the leader. And I want to propose to you this, that one of the greatest ways for us as leaders to be worthy of somebody's trust is to become more inwardly sound and others focused. I mean, just walk through this with me for just a second. I want you to think about the leaders that you've had a chance to follow. One of my favorite questions, and by the way, I invite you to test this out. One of my favorite questions to ask folks is, tell me about the best leader that you've ever followed. Listen to what they say. Many times I'll get up in front of a room and I'll just keep track as people talk about their very best leaders. I'll keep track of what they highlight. And do you know what they intuitively, inherently talk about without me even asking? They talk about the qualities of being inwardly sound and others focused. They talk about leaders who are trustworthy. And that's where we come back to the combination of this email exercise that we've just done here, kind of research together, and the research that I had a chance to be a part of so many years ago. And so this is the unexpected reality of leadership that doesn't get spoken about nearly enough. It's why I'm so excited to be here today. It's why I can confidently say I think this is an ordained time to be together, because this is the thing for us to think about. If 77% of my effectiveness as a leader and yours comes from being inwardly sound and others focused, when you look at the leadership development activities in your own life, when you look at the leadership development activities in your organization, would you say that 77% of that is about becoming more inwardly sound and others focused? That's true for very few people and for incredibly few, as in rarely, organizations. And yet, imagine you've got a lever that you can pull, and one of those levers influences 23% of leadership, and you pull the other lever and it influences 77% of leadership. Which one would you put more time and energy towards? Of course, it would be 77%. And so as we begin to wrap up and head towards our Q&A time, I want to talk just a little bit about what falls into those two categories. With regard to inwardly sound, the things that commonly end up there are things like self-awareness, which, by the way, if you're familiar with Dr. Tasha Urich's work, her work has calculated that 10 to 15% of leaders are actually self-aware. That should scare the garbage out of all of us. But self-awareness, holistically healthy, principled, purposeful, and then this big one that I see all over the place that's just so challenging, and that is secure and settled. Am I secure and settled in who I am as a person? Am I leading as if I am trying to prove to the rest of the world that I'm worthy of something? Or have I dropped that shtick and I'm perfectly fine with who I am in the forgiveness of Christ? I'm fine with who I am, and I'm leading not out of a desperation to figure out who I am, but out of a settledness in my own spirit. And then the other side, others focus, what falls into others focus. There we talk about being attentive, being curious, being empathic, being humble, and being agapone. Agapone is just the Greek derivation of agape. Many of you may know that translation literally is the word love. To say I am agapone is to say I am unconditionally caring for. The definition we actually use with our clients around agapone is service to and care for others that is selfless, consistent, and unconditional. And it is amazing to be in the for-profit space without necessarily the covering of faith-based, to engage with people about what does it mean to be a leader who is unconditionally caring. No, it does not mean you hand the keys of the safe to the thief. It does mean that we treat people with regard, whether they deserve it or not. Some of the most valuable lessons I've ever learned have been around leaders who were literally dismissing people from organizations with absolute cause. That person needed to move on. But the way that they instituted dignity and care and respect for people who, frankly, at times didn't deserve that as they went out the door, everybody watched them do that and got a better sense for the type of leader that they were following as they watched some people move on, as one of my clients said, to find their happiness somewhere else. Now, all of those things make up inwardly sound and others focused. There's one category that I left out that I didn't mention, and that is one that has its foot in both worlds. And I will say, as we dig into these topics with our clients, this is probably their favorite, and that is emotionally mature. Am I an emotionally mature person? And by the way, there's a lot more to that than just not exploding at the wrong time. There's a lot more to emotional maturity than simply managing myself. It comes well into the idea of how do I connect and be with people. So in the whole of this, I just want to offer you a visual analogy to say, how does all this fit together? And the answer from my perspective is a tree. I want you to think about a big, beautiful, healthy tree. Maybe it's one of those trees that they left in the median as they were building the highway. Maybe you've seen this. Sometimes you see this, especially in the Midwest, where you're come up over this little, it's not really a mountain because they don't have those in the Midwest, but it's a little hill, and you come around the corner and there the sun is setting and there's this big, huge, beautiful oak tree there in the center between the two, in the median between the two roads. I want you to think about that tree. And what do you think about when you see that beautiful picture? As we drive up to that tree, do you look at it and do you think, wow, I bet that tree has some great roots? We don't think that. None of us think that. We admire the part of the tree that we see, and we basically forget about the part of the tree that we don't. And that's part of the message here as well. When you think about leadership, I want to encourage you to think about yourself and the leaders you're developing as a tree with the roots in the ground, inwardly sound and others focused. Here we go. Ready? I mean, I know that nobody's going to buy my artwork, but here's a tree. Okay? Here's the roots down here. Here's all the things that we can see. What we normally talk about in leadership when we're walking through the airport and you see a book, we normally talk about what leaders do. But inwardly sound and others focused. You know what that is? That's who. That's who. And so that leads us to a simple little phrase that represents and connects with this idea of the leader as a tree. And that is this: who, not what. If we were to round that 77% and just say, well, for sake of discussion, let's call it 3/4. Here's what the phrase would be. 3/4 of your effectiveness as a leader comes from who you are, not what you do. I'm going to say it again. 3/4 of your effectiveness and mine comes from who you are, not what you do. And we need to invest with that in mind. As we get ready to head into Q&A, I have one final story to share with you. We've had the good fortune to work with some amazing clients over the years. And we were working with an organization, a kind of sizable global organization. And the CEO was all in. He was doing the work. And I emphasize that because I will tell you at times there are people that kind of like, oh, the who, not what thing, that sounds nice. Maybe we'll give that a go. And they don't really commit. They don't really dig in. They don't want to look in the mirror and see the stuff that's not so pretty to look at. And when they put the hands up, I will share with you that they don't get much out of it. And so anytime I'm sharing a story with somebody who was making great progress, the emphasis needs to go on them and the work they did. I will confess that for years, I misunderstood the most important part of this story. As an engineer, I love the data. I love the math. I love how it all works together. And I used to celebrate that at the very top. But let me tell you, let me be really clear what needs to be celebrated at the top of getting through to making great leadership success. And that is the leader doing the work. This is kind of like man or woman in the arena, if you will, where our phases are marred, but we're doing the work. We're willing to look at ourselves in the mirror and embrace that idea. This isn't a quote that's original to me, but it is an unknown source, and that is all progress begins with the truth. Am I willing to see the truth of where I'm insecure? Am I willing to see the truth where really, you know what? I'm going to say that I don't have time to be curious today because I got too many decisions to make and too many emails to get to. No, I can't say that I had any humility in that last meeting because I'm tired of hearing that other person's ideas. So I just shut them down. Are we willing to look at those stories that aren't so wonderful about us so that we can get better? So back to the leader who was doing the work, was digging in, was willing to dig in. He began to talk to me. They were making an acquisition, a big acquisition that was going to be a significant change in the scope of the organization. They were really trying to expand their footprint to be more global. And he shared with me that as we were working on these ideas, specifically, we were working on curiosity, empathy, and emotional maturity. And as he applied those to the acquisition process, he said the relationship with the bankers was different. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the deal wouldn't have gone through without his willingness to apply these principles. But I am telling you that he said applying these ideas for him to actually become more curious, more empathic, more emotionally mature, he was working on those things. He said it made the process more effective. I sent him an email and said, hey, just out of curiosity, how big was that deal? It's one of the funniest emails I've ever received back. He just wrote me a very short email back. It said $2 billion. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? We're working on these things that are about humans and humanness and our humanity. And yeah, that's a pretty sizable amount of money. There aren't too many organizations in the world that would look at 2 billion and say, oh, that's a drop in the bucket. That's a lot for most of us. Here's the other side of the story. He went on to talk about playing with his youngest son. He had 6 kids, and he really connected with his 3 oldest sons around the sport of baseball. But his 4th son, his youngest, wasn't really into it. And they would go outside to play, and his youngest would kind of be done with it pretty quickly, and they would have a not so wonderful conversation about, hey, you're never going to get any good if you don't practice, and I don't want to play anymore. And it always ended poorly. But in the midst of doing this work, he decided that he was going to apply the idea of being a more emotionally mature leader. And so he said this. He said, this summer, I'm going to play with my son baseball just the way that he wants to, because I think that's going to be better for him. Not the way I would do it, like go out in the yard for a couple of hours, but we're just going to take it a little bit at a time. And so after 15 minutes, when his son said, hey, I'm done, his new tact was this: no problem. Come and get me when you want to play again. But really, really interesting thing happened is his son started coming to him multiple times a day saying, hey, Dad, can we play catch? And all of a sudden, he figured out that instead of a big, like a 1-hour session, he was getting 4 15-minute sessions. And none of it was about his son being good at baseball. I mean, there was the premise of that. But he said at the end that he could have kicked himself for not having gone this route previously, because when he decided to be the more emotionally mature leader in the relationship, he got to experience something that had been eluding him for a long time. He just wanted to connect with his son. And, once in a while, I can tell that story and get through it without getting choked up. But most of the time I can't. Most of the time I can't, because it's so important. It's important not just at work, it's important at home. It's important everywhere. And so when we think about doing the really hard work that goes into this place of who, the really hard work of becoming more inwardly sound and more others focused, I want to say to you that it is worth it. It's worth it at work for the sake of even your own career. It's worth it at work for the sake of developing other leaders. It's worth it at work for the bottom line. I have seen this myself, where bottom lines improve because people are becoming more well-developed human beings. But of course, and also, it's worth it everywhere else that we lead as well, including at home. So I want to leave you with this idea, the simple idea of who, not what. That 3/4 of our effectiveness as leaders comes from who we are, not what we do. It is not just a sounding good or feeling good story. It is the truth backed up by data. And it is my promise to you that if you choose to go down a road to improve who you are, to become more inwardly sound and others focused, it will pay off everywhere that you lead and influence. So thanks for listening, everybody. I think we're going to head over to the Q&A time. So Matt, I will kick it back to you for that.
Man, thank you, Tim. You got me there at the end, talking about I'm a dad of teenagers, so you got me all in my feels right now. So really hit home. This has been great so far. I really appreciate you sharing with us, and we've got a lot of good questions coming in already. Please continue sending in your questions. Just drop them in that Q&A section, and we'll get to as many as we can here over the next few minutes. But one thing that I think would be helpful just to repeat again, if you wouldn't mind, is some of the traits of inwardly sound and others focused. There are some questions just about what those were, and we can Kelsey, if we could drop those in the chat maybe afterwards, that'd be helpful too.
Sure, sure. So let's go through them, and I can give a little more background to each one of them. So I mentioned secure and settled. So this is the idea that I'm comfortable in my own skin and I'm at peace about what the future may hold. A good friend, a buddy of mine who does great leadership development work himself, John Ott, he puts it this way: if you're secure and settled, then you are somebody who can say, I'm okay, and come what may, I'm okay. That's something that really hits home with people when they try to understand, okay, what does it mean to be a secure and settled person? We talked about self-awareness just a little bit. It's the idea that not only do I understand who I am, but really critically important from a leadership standpoint, do I understand the impact that I'm having on others? And sometimes, far too often, I would say, is we as leaders don't understand the full impact. When we come into work and are having a bad day, and look, this is not a message that we have to be perfect. You can't be perfect, but how much better can we be? But we probably don't understand that when we come into work a little bit sideways, we probably don't understand the outsized impact that it has on others. And so lots of times we as leaders are lacking that self-awareness because we have positional authority and power, and people, unless we've made it really easy, they don't want to tell us, hey, look, you're being a punk right now. I don't know what's going on with you, but can you go back out to your car and come back in? We don't normally get those messages from people. And that's why Dr. Urich's work is so important, because it points out how short we are on really understanding who we are and how we impact others. So self-awareness is a part of it. Talked about the idea of being principled. This is where some of the typical things that you probably would be thinking about in terms of integrity, honesty. I would throw, Angela Duckworth's work on grit into this idea of being a principled person ultimately. And so this one's obviously really connected to this trustworthiness idea. Am I a person of integrity? And by the way, integrity is, the definition we use is doing what I say I will and admitting when I don't. There are going to be times when we drop the ball. Can we beat other people to the punch? Can I beat somebody calling me out and say, you know what? I didn't come through. You know what? I didn't carry my piece of it. I didn't hit the deadline. That's on me. I apologize. That's part of integrity, is really just stepping in and finding that. And so being a principled person involves those ideas. If we move on to being purposeful, this is, do I know why I'm here? This is not a corporate mission statement. This is, why am I taking breath? What am I up to? What does God have for me to be doing? And that doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the position you hold in an organization. What are the deepest values that you hold, and how are you trying to, as the phrase goes, put a dent in the universe? Are you clear on that? And then finally, we start to get into, I talked about emotional maturity. And so this idea is to say that we have the opportunity to be somebody who puts our emotions through a refinery so they come out the other side as useful. The analogy that was taught to me is the idea of, think about emotions as oil. When oil goes into the refinery, what's it called? It's literally called crude. It's crude oil. It goes through the refinery, and one of the products that comes out the other side is still called oil, but it's no longer in its crude form. It's in a usable form. That's a great analogy for us to think about our emotions. Yes, I have that initial reaction, and I will share with you, my initial knee-jerk reaction is very rarely the fullest expression of what I really feel. It is just that. It is crude and knee-jerk. If I take a breath and a pause, I can usually get to the other side and say, yeah, I might still be angry or upset, but here's the fuller picture of my emotion. Here's the fuller picture of me. So emotional maturity becomes really, really important in that regard. So those are a lot of the things that are connected into inwardly sound. I think the others focused stuff is a little more obvious on its face, attentive. We got to deal with these things. We got to deal with these things. So am I attentive? Am I curious? Am I empathic? Am I humble? And we talked about being loving as well. So those are the qualities. And I know that's really, really fast. In the book, we spend about 3 pages on each one of those things. In the work that we do, we spend about 3 months on each one of those things. So in the fact that I just did maybe about 3 minutes, obviously there's a whole lot more to get into with each one of those. But that's a little bit of a snapshot of the pieces of inwardly sound in particular, and others focused as well.
Yeah, thank you for going into more detail. You mentioned a few times there talking about self-awareness, being curious, looking in the mirror. at yourself. What are some healthy ways that you can think of that we can personally gauge how well we're doing or growing in these areas of inwardly sound and others focused?
So to answer that, I want to share with you the process that we go through with our clients, and anybody can do this. Like I hope that we all engage in this. So I have no hesitation about sharing this, but there's two sets of three I would answer that question with, which one is learn, apply, reflect, LAR, and then DCT. I'll come back to DCT in a moment. Learn, apply, reflect, especially in adult learning theory. I mean, we learn a little bit by listening, but we learn a whole lot more by doing. And so we might get introduced, like you might get introduced to this idea of who, not what today, but it's really not going to make a difference for you unless you go do something about it. And so learning something, then we put it into application. Then the thing that I think, especially, we've had the privilege of working around a number of different cultures. I think in Western world, we are particularly bad at reflection. We are particularly bad at pausing to think through, what did I just experience? What just happened? What was going on inside of me while that was happening? And so these three things are a wonderful combination of things to work together to learn, apply, reflect, learn, apply, reflect, learn, apply, reflect. Now, what's DCT all about? DCT is really critical when it comes to what I'm going to call who-based development. When you're working on who you are, I do not think that it's possible to make great progress without DCT. And here's what DCT is: depth, community, and time. Depth means we cannot just look at actions. If we're going to really do who-based development, we've got to pick up the rock, look underneath, and see motives, perspectives, and worldview. Community, we tend to do most of our work in groups of 3 to 4. We'll take an executive team of, say, 16, and we'll put them up into 4 groups of 4, and we will travel through this content, and that will be their primary home base for learning. Community adds a lot of great things. Number one, obviously, it applies some accountability to following through. But also, community gives us the chance to watch other people's experiences and learn from them. And then finally, it gives others a chance to speak into the experiences that we're having and give us their thoughts and perspective on things. So community is really important. And then there's time. Nobody likes this one. The business community especially hates this one. They're like, can you just give me the pill, Tim? Look, I promise everybody here, as soon as we get the pill figured out in research and development, we're going to sell it. But until then, we have to take time. It takes time to grow and develop in these things. To kind of put a covering on all of this answer, I will tell you that I share with our clients many times, somewhat joking, but not really, which is, I don't care about you learning anything, but I will crawl over broken glass to help you become something. That's really, become is a huge word for us, because it would be so much easier for us to do, a series of lunch and learns and then say, good luck, I hope you figure it out. But what we really want to help people do, and what I want to encourage everybody here to do, is to think about that word, becoming. What does it take to become a more inwardly sound and others focused person? I think LAR and DCT are the keys to doing that kind of work and making that happen.
Somebody was asking about working with teams that have different levels of emotional intelligence as a leader when you are dealing with those different levels. How do you balance that? How does this play into engaging with those team members?
Yeah, what I have found is that as you put these ideas in front of people, you just engage with them. If somebody's less well developed in the emotional space, then they're going to give you less well developed answers. But it's a step forward. And so I think, we need to probably properly manage our expectations, that this isn't like, I just heard the phrase and now I'm magically more aware of and dialed in with my emotions. But I think to not be afraid to be in the dialogue. This is another thing that I think is so critical for all of us, especially when you're talking about business life, is who's willing to be in the conversation? What organizations and leaders are willing to talk about inwardly sound and others focused? I think those individuals and those organizations they're going to rule the future, I believe, with regard to leadership and leadership development. So you're going to find different levels in all of these things, not just emotional maturity. And my encouragement is have reasonable expectations and make sure that you're focused on progress, not perfection. I mean, when we see somebody, I mean, think about what we do with babies. This is an easy one, right? A baby works its way up onto its feet for the first time, and then it takes a step and then it falls over. And do we go, boo, boo, you're not sprinting? Like, we don't do that. We lose our minds cheering them because we know that's headed in the right direction, that they're going to eventually. I think as leaders, no matter what we're talking about, emotions or otherwise, when we see people that are moving in the right trajectory, we need to cheer like crazy. Trajectory is more important than particular station. If somebody's on the right trajectory, they're eventually going to get there. So I think that's what we as developers of others want to pay really close attention to around emotions and anything else.
Yeah, progress, not perfection. I love that. Are there resources that you would point people to when they're trying to think through how do I grow in these areas?
Well, there's a lot of stuff out in the world, and we talk about emotions. There's a lot of different, but Primal Leadership is one that comes to mind. That's an older book, but it gets into some really great ideas. So I wouldn't say that there's kind of one text or one course that necessarily covers all of it. But if you were to dig in and think about those things that they just listed off as part of Inwardly Sound and Others Focused, I ran into a podcast the other day. The entire podcast is dedicated to curiosity. So imagine you're like, okay, I can't eat an elephant at one bite. I can't work on all these things at one time. Let me take the next 3 months and work on curiosity. Well, if you got 2 or 3 other people, back to the community part, and say, hey, what if we dug into this podcast about curiosity for the next 3 months? And we held ourselves, and said, what am I going to do about this? And so anytime you run into something about humility, something about emotional maturity, as we've been talking, something about self-awareness. Self-awareness is kind of easy in that there's 100 assessments out there. So if you wanted to say, hey, here's the 3 assessments we're going to take, we're going to share our results with one another. Each one of those things that we talked about in Inwardly Sound and Others Folk has tons of content and material in different places out there. So I don't have a single resource, but those kinds of resources are great. And if you buddy up with people, then that helps you to say, okay, now what am I going to do about it? I'll share one aspect regarding curiosity, excuse me, just to make it simple, which is if you said to other people, hey, the 4 of us, I'm going to use the phrase, tell me more about that twice a day for the next 3 months. Watch what happens to your relationships and information if you do that. I share that example just to say we can make this really complicated, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that ties right into that aspect of curiosity.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tim, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us before we turn it back over to Kelsey?
Last thing I want to say, I don't always get the opportunity to be so blatant about this, but I want you to think about Jesus. I mean, when I say inwardly sound and others focused, does that describe him? Does that describe the greatest leader ever? Think about how clear he had to be about what his mission was, who he was, and what he was there for. And then his very life being a full sacrifice given on our behalf. When I look at those 2 words, I imagine Jesus' name real big and underneath inwardly sound and others focused. I don't know that I can think of a lot of other combination of words that would better describe him. And so I want to close by let's look at the example. Yes, he was a servant, but also, let me just say, he was inwardly sound too. And that's what enabled him to be a servant. So I just want to lift his name up and the spotlight on him as we close out today.
Amen, brother. Thank you. I hope you guys were as encouraged as I was by what Tim shared with us. Really enjoyed this time with you, Tim. I'm going to invite Kelsey back on now. She's going to close our time together and share some next steps about how you can learn more about Tim and his work. So thanks, Tim.
Yes. Tim, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. It was really, really encouraging and super practical. So thank you. Tim's book, The Only Leaders Worth Following, is available online where books are sold. You can also hear more from Tim at theaperio.com and connect with him on his social platforms. Tune in to the Be Worth Following podcast, where Tim talks with leaders, thinkers, and researchers on what drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. Listen to Be Worth Following on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. For more information on the RightNow Media at Work platform and to find out how this library can help your employees flourish in every area of life, schedule your demo to get a free in-depth tour at rightnow.me/workdemo. You can also be on the lookout for Tim's new series coming to the RightNow Media at Work platform in 2025. And with that, we'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. We appreciate your time and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.